Hey, welcome back, everyone. Join the Twitch chat. Thanks to everyone who came to the office hours. I know they're optional, but I want to make them work for everyone as much as I can. So I really appreciate everyone's presence. And we're going to start today with a brief review because there's something from the basic structure of the program that I didn't really harp enough as much as I wanted to. And that's basically when you have a basic p5.js program, you've got two parts that you can put commands into. One is the setup part, one is the draw part. And as we saw last time, there's some flexibility in what you can put where. The main difference is for things that go in the setup function, you generally want those to happen once and only once. So you don't want to keep creating the canvas over and over again unless you have a special reason to. So you'd put that in setup. And if you had something that followed your mouse cursor, you would want it to do it repeatedly, not just one time and one time only. So that would go in your draw function. As we saw in office hours, there's sometimes the things that you want to go in the draw function could go in the setup function. It just depends on whether you want them to happen over and over again or just one time. Another tidbit that we didn't really go into that much is the semicolon. The semicolon at this point in time is going to be optional. It's a good best practice to adopt early on. And sometimes with other programming languages, that's probably your number one source of bugs early on. With JavaScript, it's a lot more forgiving, but just be aware that semicolons go on the end of statements. A statement is different than a line. Right now we have three lines. This function name, and then the part inside the function takes a semicolon, and then the ending curly brace at the end does not take a semicolon. You might wonder, why does this matter? Well, a line and a statement are two different things. A statement is basically a command that stands on its own, whereas a line on its own might not be able to do anything. If I deleted this and just had this function, this line is no longer going to do anything for me. I need the whole thing with everything between the curly braces as well. What's inside the curly braces is called the scope of that function. Now, this is going to cause a lot of problems throughout your programming career because you're going to declare variables inside a function or at the top of your program, and there might be a chance that some part of your program might not be able to access that variable, or it can't change that variable. So just be aware of where you're declaring your functions. One rule is that the further down in these curly braces you go, the harder it is to access it. And the higher up you are, the easier it is to access it. But with that comes a trade-off. The easier it is to access a variable, the more problems you could evolve, especially if you're reusing names. So that's just like a little foreshadowing of some of the issues that programmers tend to face. Let me check Twitch chat. Okay. The quality does look better than last time, which I'm grateful for. Webcam is lagging a little. I'm sorry. I just bought a brand new Mac Pro, and Apple hasn't really released hasn't really updated the webcams in a long time. So maybe next week I'll get a better webcam. Okay. So this is going to be the core of this lecture, and that is drawing. And this has a lot of parts, and these slides are a good reference to go back to. This is mainly going to be in Replit, but I want you to at least look at and be aware of some of the concepts. So the most basic concept for drawing is the canvas. You have to put your drawings on something. I can't draw in the air, but I can draw on a piece of paper. I can draw on this slide. So basically, your coordinate system for your canvas is going to start at the top. Oh, I did not mean to go forward. So Okay, I can't draw it to the actual corner. So up here in the corner is basically where you start the canvas. Is that line big enough for people to see, or is this not useful? Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, other way. All right. So up here, that's where all your shapes start. They start at 0, or technically 0, 0, because it's a two-dimensional coordinate system. So X and Y, those are going to be your best friends. So 0, 0, you start up there and you draw. And as you move down, your X values grow. And as you go to the right, your Y values, sorry, your X values grow as you go right. Your Y values grow as you go down. It's not the same as math class where you started here. So try to disabuse yourself of that one. So just remember, top left corner. Okay. So the next one is, well, what shapes do I have? We have a bunch of shapes, and we've got a great reference. I'm going to drop this in the Twitch chat now. Okay, I need to stop annotating. uh, what I do is I don't remember stuff that well, but I remember where to go to find out. And everything you need to do this class is here. It's not going to be that straightforward, but if you put in the effort to like look at what these shapes do and things about them, you'll be handsomely rewarded. The most basic shape is going to be a point. That's kind of trivial. It's not what you think of when you think shapes, but you build lines out of points and you build shapes out of lines. And then you have special shapes like the circle that's technically a lot of points at the same distance from a center. So you don't have straight lines, but you do have a lot of points, technically an infinite amount, but we're going to focus on line-based shapes for this lesson. Now, this is the most basic shape you have, a line. Now, I'm showing you the documentation instead of the replit for now because I want you to become familiar with looking things up when you don't know them. This reference is as close to a textbook or a cheat sheet as you can have for this class since we don't have an actual textbook that we're giving you. But getting familiar with looking up things when you need to find out more is basically what you want to do. It might seem a little opaque at first. We've got this line 30, 20, 80, 85, 75. What is that? Well, it tells you. Now, I'm not going to reread this. I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence. But if you need to catch up on shapes, please go. If you think you know everything about shapes, please go. I learned a lot of new things. So basically for a line is composed of 2 points, this point and that point. This point has an X value and a Y value. So does this point. When I have those 4 values for those 2 X's and 2 Y's, I can draw a line that connects the 2 of them. That is the most basic concept in geometry after the concept of a single point. And everything we're going to do is going to build on that. Now, we've covered shapes, but what about coloring a shape? And what about the outline of a shape? That's a great question. These commands are also available on the website that I just showed you, the reference. Fill, we messed around with that a little bit last time. We've got values for red, green, and blue, and now we have a new parameter that's called the alpha channel, or A. That just corresponds to the notion of transparency. Something could be translucent, and if you have multiple shapes on top of each other, you would be able to see through them if they have an alpha value that gives them transparency. Now, the fill command, that's what goes inside the shape. The stroke command is what goes around the shape. And there's a special command that just turns off the outline. That's no stroke. Now, my question is, how do you control the thickness of the shape's outlines? If you went ahead and looked at The reference guide I posted in the chat, you might be able to find it. Let's see some answers in Twitch. Pop quiz. Give you everyone 1 minute. Stroke. Okay. I think I have speaker notes for one, but it was mainly just to get rid of something. Sorry, I was talking to Jordan. I'm not schizophrenic yet. It might happen eventually, but for now I'm good. Great. I've got 4 answers. One of them is good. 2 of them are good. I've got 5 answers. Yeah, I got 2 good answers, but I like them both for different reasons. So great. Cool. Active learning is good learning. So stroke. This is the standard term for the outline of a shape. So if you become a graphic designer and you talk about stroke, your client is going to know what you mean. So you're getting a little bit more out of this class than usual. So basically everything you need to do after you've defined your colors and create your canvas, obviously, is to define your stroke. That I've picked some really, really ugly green color, and I decided to make it really bold. So I'm giving it a stroke weight of 4. In general, I just go with a black stroke. I mean, black is really elegant for strokes, and I tried to do something where it was like really garish just to get the point across. I've already defined the fill color somewhere else. I think the hexadecimal value for this color should never be known to the public, so I'm not sharing it with you. And here we have a rectangle, and it is starting at 2020, XY 2020, and it is 60 pixels wide and 60 pixels tall. That's what the last 2 parameters tell us. Now, do some basic shape operations before I keep going. Now, does everyone see this? I just have these 4 shapes, and I added in this little handy helper that some of you may have seen. I think Jordan created this, so congratulate Jordan, whether he did or not. It just, anytime you click, the console right here is going to tell you the X and Y values for where your mouse was. That will help you a lot. And if you stick around to the lab, which I hope you do, I'm going to be giving a template for P5JS programs that includes this, and it'll be everything you need to get started rapidly. So I hope you hang on to that. So I've created kind of a larger canvas. It's a medium gray. Now you might ask, why don't I have RGB values? Why do I have just 1 number? Put it in the chat if you know why I just put 1 number and what I'm doing with that. Great, grayscale. I like spelling it with the E, but cool. Grayscales also go through 0 to 255. So do alphas. So remember that, 0 to 255. And there's a special reason why we use 0 to 255. And it's not super important, but that's how many values we have in 1 byte of information. And so if you're wondering why 256 keeps popping up, it has to do with some very fundamental electronical engineering that we're not going to go into, but one day you might. Now it's the same thing here. I filled it. I'm still messing around with the alpha channels sometimes, and then sometimes I'm not. So I'm filling them with this color. I'm giving them a very slight stroke, and I've made a rectangle, an ellipse, and a triangle. An ellipse is kind of like a boneless circle where it can be kind of like flattened or lopsided or squished. So it looks like a circle right now just because I made it 80 by 80. But when I change it, it's kind of squished. So if you don't really want like a pristine circle and want to make like a UFO or a saucer or something, that's what you do. Now, triangles. Triangles are just 3 lines, but P5.js lets you just define a triangle in one single go, which I think is nice. But you can make a triangle manually the old-fashioned way if you want. You might learn some things from it, but that's it. That's it for the basic, the most basic shapes. Um, then I was fiddling around and I did the no stroke thing and made another rectangle here. We can see here it's 60 by 60, so that's technically a square. One good thing about P5GS, and you've seen that with the ellipse, is you can make circles and squares using the ellipse and rectangle commands respectively. It's good to keep in mind. And then here's that handy little utility function that tells you where you just clicked. Okay, Jordan just let me know he opened a poll. Let us know if you prefer spelling gray with an E or an A. We're trying this out for the future, so this is not going to become a class about favorite colors and color spellings, but I do think that having polls would be pretty cool. Oh, I can vote. Oh, okay. 20 seconds left, and my camera is so delayed that by the time you hear this, it's probably done. Okay, we'll find out results later. Hopefully, it won't involve. 7-4, gray with an A1. Congratulations, you heretics. Um, so this slide, the coordinates, I just left it in here in case you're studying and you're like, I need Jordan's code for the mouse coordinates really badly right now, and all I have are these PowerPoint slides. So there you go. But I've been getting some questions about mouse X and mouse Y. I'd like to think of them at first, especially as special variables that every time you access them, it gives you back wherever your mouse cursor is, or just the X value rather. We've seen some other special variables like the width variable that basically return the width of the midpoint if we divide it by 2 of the canvas. And so keep in mind that not all of the variables that we want to use we're allowed to define on our own. We get them from p5.js. And one of the challenges I want you to think of as you move along is how to draw shapes where all of the points that it's defined with are in terms of the mouse position. What that means is if you have a rectangle, the top left corner is going to be where the mouse is. The top right corner is going to be some offset on one of the X or Y values. The opposite corner is going to be an offset of the other variable. And then finally, the last corner is going to be offset of both the mouse Y value and the mouse X value. That might not make sense written out or spoken out. So I'm going to draw what I mean. Oh, don't want to spoil that. It's the most important part of the lesson. Okay. I don't know what this is. I don't care. All right. So we will. Actually, let me ask Twitch. What shape should I draw? Please keep it simple. Rectangle, triangle, and yeah, rectangle or triangle. Vote. Can we do a poll? Okay. Jordan says he did not get enough lead time, but I see a lot of triangles and a triad. Yeah, we're gonna go with a triangle. I don't know why we're asking for a triangle. Hopefully this is not people wanting to get a heads up on the homework. All right. We got 2 points. And then we got a line between 2 points. So I'm gonna, if I just write mouse or M, I mean X and Y. If I write M X, I just mean X. So right here, this is gonna be at the mouse position. And this is gonna be mouse position minus C. And this is gonna, we're subtracting C from this, not from X. Minus C. So we're gonna, this is our offset. It's always gonna be the same, so it's a constant. Oh boy. So let's see what this, if we wanted to make this in Replit, what would this look like? We would have to try and turn off annotation. Okay, so I'm not going to show any code, so do not bother me asking for this code. So annotation is still on. Okay. I kind of went ahead and did the homework. Basically, I've got a line here. I have one single point where my mouse cursor is, and then I have 3 other points that are defined in terms of that initial mouse point. And that is how you're going to make all your shapes if you want them to be dynamic. You want to start with where your mouse is. It could be anywhere, but just think of it as like a fixed point that you're defining other things in terms of as you define your rectangle or your triangle. So hopefully that visualization makes a little more sense. Let's try it with a rectangle this time. So here we have 4 points, and this is going to be where the mouse is. So this is going to be the mouse plus X, and this is going to be the mouse plus some Y value. We don't know what these are. These can be anything. They could be variable. And this is going to be M plus X, comma, M plus Y. And so if we said X is equal to 50, this is 50, this is 50 because it's a rectangle. And we're going to say Y equals 100. Now, this is problematic because it's obviously more of a square than a rectangle. So let's say this is okay. So all we need to do for this is define a rectangle in terms of mouse position at the first point, and then have this offset for the width and the height, and everything else will be taken care of. We're going to go over this extensively in the lab, but I just want you to get familiar with drawing these problems out, because your best friend, believe it or not, as a computer programmer, is going to be pen and paper a lot of times. And these kinds of problems, starting on pen and paper is going to get you a lot further than if you just try to sit in front of Replit and experiment until you get the right way. But you know what? Some of you might be so talented that just sitting in front of Replit might be the way to go. So I encourage you to try out different things and see which kind of learner you really are. Okay, now this is a very important command, and I made it really big to harp home that sometimes you want to get rid of everything on your canvas. This is how you do it. pen, a pencil. The most important part of a pencil is the eraser. The most important part of drawing is the clear command. We're going to move on to color, but are there any questions in chat? Cool, crickets. Oh, that's a good one, yeah. So color, this is gonna be a little bit of a review from last time. We went over how you can use a literal color name like red or gray. I think it'll accept it either way you spell it, which is pretty cool. The other way is just to put the hexadecimal value preceded by the octothorpe sign, or hash or pound, or sometimes people call it sharp, but it's not technically a sharp. But you might hear that. You can put a hexadecimal value. That's useful if you're a web designer because web pages and cascading style sheets use hexadecimal values for colors. I'm assuming that's why it's in p5.js, but I'd prefer it if you use RGB values. Just remember they're between 0 and 255. Everything you need to know about the color operations is on that reference that I linked you to. Oh. And again, if you just have one number in the color command, that gives you grayscale. So if you want to get a solid black or a solid white, that's what you do. And I mentioned this earlier, we have something new called the alpha channel. That's the 4th color parameter. It just tells you how transparent or opaque the color is. And remember, the fill command is what determines what color your shapes are. There's a lot of different ways to do fills. As you can see, I've come up with 4 different ways, including passing a variable. These are all equivalent. And if you notice, there's a color command that's kind of a wrapper. I was messing around with it, and you don't really need that wrapper all the time. As you can see, fill red is the same as fill color red. It's good for making things explicit, and it's good for playing with variables, as you can see in the last 2 lines. I made it so I'm just passing fill a variable instead of a string called red. I'm passing it a color called red. And again, this is just kind of like a review, but the most basic way to draw a shape is you define the fill color and then you call the shape, giving it the origin points and the width and height. Some shapes are only based on points, some need a height and width, some only need a single side in the case of squares. Some, like circles, they need a diameter or radius. So just remember, look at the documentation if you don't know how to make a shape, a specific shape. And if you don't know how to make a specific shape, just rectangles are fun. Nothing wrong with rectangles. So what this command did is these 2 lines, these 2 statements on 2 lines, I'm telling P5JS, I want my shapes filled with this color object. It has these red, green, and blue values, which are 0, 0, and 255 respectively. And then I want you to draw this rectangle starting at 2020, which are XY coordinates, and its dimensions are 60 by 60. And when it draws this rectangle, it will look for the last time you call the fill command and any other stroke commands related to it, and it will do the thing. In this case, fill it with that color. I'm gonna move on to variables, but I want to mess around in Replit first. So I met a guy today in another conference call. His name was Junhyuk. He seemed cool, so I decided that he's my new best friend. But unfortunately, I'm never going to see him again. So when I was setting up the program, I decided, well, Fred, my old best friend, he's really my best friend. Junhyuk, I'm never going to see him again. So I decided, well, my best friend is Fred. So I've declared the variable I've declared the variable for the first time up here. I've declared it a second time here. But when I run it, Samir is here. Now what happened was when I was doing the drawing function, I remembered Samir. and he, I think he's my best friend. And so I decided to put him there. So I've got this variable here 3 times, and yet, well, I technically have it 4 times, but I want to show you what happens. So, okay, I've changed it, I've updated it. Oh no, who's my best friend? Does anyone have any idea where I messed up? Post your theories in Twitch. Um, okay, well, no theories yet. So let's get rid of Samir. Let's get rid of Fred. He never really did much. I'm gonna run this program again. Who is my best friend? Put your answer in chat. That's the best answer, Daniel. There are too many names, so I don't know. Okay, I'm getting some Samirs. He's pretty popular. No wonder he became my best friend today. Oh, it was Junhyuk. Okay, there's okay. So I declared it up here. Is it because he's up here, or well, maybe it's Fred. Let me try it here. Oh, okay, so it's Fred. So what's going on is I'm playing with the scope. Now the scope is, you can think of it as like the level of the code. This is the highest level, and then this is the next highest level. But and Jordan gave me a really good pointer. It's, you could also think of them as like a house, and if something is inside or outside the house, it makes a difference on what you can do. So let's think of Jin Hyuk as outside my house, and Fred is inside the house. So when I print out who my best friend is in the draw part, it's going to look for who's the closest to my house, or who's at the closest level of my program to where I declared who my best friend is. So I'll run this, and it's still Fred. You might also have noticed that there's a random number. If you were ambitious and watched the videos ahead, there was a little part about random numbers. I wanted to put that in here in case you wanted to do something with it later. But it's not important. I just wanted to have 2 lines drawn on screen. Okay, now I'm done with Fred. So I think Samir should be my best friend. So again, it's, if I declare Samir after I say who my best friend is, it seems like it prints them both twice. Whereas if I put it here first, it prints it once and just with the last person I called my best friend. So what's going on is the scope is cascading, where we have the global scope, which is Junhyuk. Junhyuk is outside of the setup function and outside of the draw function. So you can think of Junhyuk as like on my curve, like, hey, come on, we talk about BTS, and like we like video games, and it's like, okay, I don't know you. But Fred, Fred's been around a while, like he can hang out in my living room. But then when I'm like in my kitchen, like maybe Samir can go to my fridge anytime he wants. So when I'm in this part of the program, it's Samir that comes up. Now, we had that weird thing where I had commented out Samir and put it in after I printed out, but it printed twice. And this goes back to that recall, that draw function. It runs repeatedly. So what we're doing here is we have a value for best friend from setup, and that value is Fred. We're printing Fred, and then we're running and then we keep running the program. And we called Samir my best friend after I had texted printed who my best friend was. So after I print Fred, I changed my best friend to Samir, and then I print it again because it's a loop. And a loop is just a computer science construct of that means this thing runs repeatedly. It can run repeatedly indefinitely, which is the case here, or it can run just a couple times. We're going to go into that later, but I just want you to recognize that when you put things in draw, it will run multiple times, and it will look for the values for variables here first, and then move to setup, and then look at global. And what happens if I just, set up my variable outside and forget it. And now I have my best friend variable running around still, but I've got a problem now. I declared the variable here in setup, and I have it called here, but draw can't access it if it's in setup. That is why I put the first declaration outside of setup and outside of draw. It doesn't matter about Junhyuk, it could be blank. But I have somewhere in my program that I have a variable by this name, and when I'm in the setup function, it's Samir, or it's Fred. When I'm in the draw function, it's Samir. And when I'm in neither of them, it was Junhyuk. But this is basically how you think of variables, is they apply downwardly if you declare them at the top of your program, that is like outside of all the functions. But if you declare them inside a function, it's only going to affect it within that function, unless you do like some magic or rigmarole or other things that we're not covering right now. So if you want a variable in setup and in draw to be shared, think about how you do that. And the way I did it was to put it outside of the scope of those two functions. Now that was a lot, but this is something that more than anything else is going to cause you problems as well as help you get ahead, is recognizing where the scope of your variables applies. And that's great. I just told you all about scope, but I didn't tell you what variables are. That was on purpose, and I'm still not going to tell you what variables are in a formal sense, but in a technical sense, and feel free to forget everything I tell you. A variable is a location in memory, the computer memory, paired with a symbolic name. You can think of it as a label. And the contents of that location contains a value. So my best friend is that label. The value is Samir or Fred or Junhyuk. Junhyuk is in memory somewhere. And that variable tells me inside this piece of memory is Junhyuk, or a string Junhyuk, not like the actual Junhyuk. That doesn't really help us right now, though. I'd say, and thanks to Jordan for helping me with this, informally, you should think of it as a label on a box. It helps you find that box and get to it inside. The box can start empty, or you can declare it with something. It doesn't matter, and its contents can change. The restriction on changing the contents, of course, is scope, which I told you about. And then we have a special operation called var. And you saw that when I was declaring my variable globally, I had that on there. That just tells the computer, that tells JavaScript explicitly that this is a variable. You can do without it. And why would you want to do without it? Any ideas in chat real quick? So we have declared all right, so we did, as we can see, I declared it globally, and I'm still getting it overprinted. Now, what happens if I put the var here? Nothing. I didn't expect that, but okay. That's why. So when you put the var keyword or operator in front of a variable, what you're telling JavaScript is, I don't care if there's a variable called this, get rid of it, erase it, and this is the new variable that I'm starting over. That starting is called initialization. When you initialize a variable, you're assuming that anything called the same name is going to be thrown away or is in another scope, so it doesn't matter. But initializing it with the var keyword will delete whatever's in there. So it doesn't matter whatever I put here. It matters what I put here because I put var. If in doubt, if your variables aren't resolving to what you expect them to, check and see if you have a var keyword or not and switch it around. That's the basic troubleshooting for that. Assigning variables. This is easy. We use an equal sign operator. We can initialize a variable using the equal sign operator. We can change a variable using the equal signs variable. So my example is my savings account. I've got $100 in it. Tomorrow, I'm going to get another dollar in it. So I want it to update to be 101. So my savings is going to equal the previous value of my savings plus 1. So I don't get paid that much. Okay. There's another thing about variables that's going to come extremely important, not this lesson, but when we get to loops and conditional statements. We have a data type called Booleans. It basically is a logical construct, meaning this statement is true or false. So 1 equals 1, that's true. 1 equals 2, that's false. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in outer space. It's always going to be false. But for like programmatic things, true and false can come and go, especially when we update values. So sometimes we're going to want to do a routine until a certain criteria is met. And that's when we use the double equal sign operator. And that just evaluates whether this statement, which can be a variable or it can be a string or a number, we're just seeing if what's on the left-hand side and the right-hand side are the same or not. If they're the same, JavaScript will return it as true. If they're different, it'll return as false. We're not using this yet, but I'm introducing this now because we assign variables using the single equal sign operator. We use the double equal sign operator for something else, and this will trip you up at some point. You will miss these. You will mix these up. No matter how careful you are, this will happen. Or it'll happen to someone else, and maybe you'll be their hero, and you'll find it. Who knows? I went into scope. Just remember, scope and curly braces correspond. So if you're confused about scope, think about the curly braces. And scope can also be applied globally at the top of your program. A lot of you saw that. So think of that. If it's at the top of your program, it's global. If it's nested in somewhere, you're going to think about it as being local to the code that's within those curly braces, and it will correspond to, let's say, like when you get to loops, variables tend to have scope issues with loops. When you get to functions, variables will have scope that depends on that function. So just keep this in mind. This is not something we care about yet, but this is something we're going to care about a lot. So this is just another example. I've declared a variable, color variable blue. I did not put this as camel case. I apologize for the poor syntax. I've declared the same thing with the same name twice with different values. When it's outside of the setup function, it's global. When it's inside the setup function or inside the draw function, for that matter, it's local. And whatever it is outside won't matter. Now, to update a variable, let's say we wanted to draw something moving. This is a really good time to use variables. So we're going to start a counter at 1. I'd prefer it if you started at 0, but It's neither here nor there. So we're going to put in our draw function, which I kind of hinted is like a free loop, and it just does everything you want repeatedly until you turn off the program. We're going to draw a rectangle at 0, 0. It's going to be 120 by 40. After it's drawn, we're going to increment that counter. So the next time it's drawn, it's going to be drawn at 0 plus whatever the counter is, 0, whatever the counter is. Those are the XY values. So if we started it with the counter at 0, it would start at the top left corner. I don't know which corner it is for you seeing it, and it would work its way across the screen. And that leads us to our last topic, which is going to be okay. Jordan asked me to go back, and I think he's going to put up a poll to vote on whether you think it'll be blue or red. Great. Okay, the poll is closing. Red. It was red. Good job for all of you. It's great class. All right. I'll go back to, okay, so now that we've covered variables, we're going to get into objects. And objects, it's a big field. I'm not going to lie to you. Everything in JavaScript, everything in p5.js, you can kind of consider it an object. But I mean something else. I mean taking variables and turning them into objects. And what that means is we're grouping attributes together to make like a mega variable. Because a variable, it's one label and it returns one value. What if you wanted to return a point? A point is a pair of coordinates, right? X, Y. That needs two variables, unless we could make a super variable. And that's where objects come in. They solve that problem of needing to return multiple values from a single named entity. And typically, variables will only give you one return value. Objects will let you play with that a little more. And I'm going to say it right now before anyone asks, yes, an object can be a member of another object. And I want to say in JavaScript, practically anything can be a part of an object. It's good to experiment with it. And speaking of experimentation, it's computer science, so you should be doing experimentation. What that experimentation is, I don't know. But remember, we're scientists, not just coders. Coding gets you paid, but experiments get you learned. So, like I said, a point is a pair of two whole numbers. A color is a triple or a quadral. I don't know if that's a word, of whole numbers, or it's just a single if you're playing with grayscale. But let's assume like the RGB color is a triple of whole numbers. We want to group them together and go over some basic syntax. We're going to initialize objects similar to, but a little differently than how we do variables. And I want everyone to remember, like, objects are similar to variables, but they are different in significant ways. And the most significant way is we're assigning things using the colon operator. And we initialize things using the colon operator, but we are going to update them similarly to variables. But what we need, you might be thinking already, well, if an object has 3 or 4 values in it, how do I know which of those 4 values to get access to and to update if I want to change it? We're going to use the dot operator or the period operator. It's usually called the dot operator across computer science languages, programming languages. So what does that all look like? Here, I am declaring a compound object or a compound variable of several little things. I'm going to call them color, height, and Y offset. Now, the word compound and the equal sign, that's all. That's pretty much all it has in common with the syntax of variables. Now we have a curly bracket and an end curly bracket with 3 lines in them. Each of those lines has a comma, and each of those lines has a word, like a variable name almost, and a value. Remember, the color operator, color 0, 0, 0, that is technically a single object. So like I said, you can put an object into another object, or you can put a simple variable like height. What you're not able to do is use the equal sign within those curly brackets. So just remember, curly brackets, colon, if you're doing objects. Okay, this is a really important question. What is that syntax I just described called? Okay, we're in emote mode, so you have to answer interpretively with emotes. And actually, I think there's one emote that would work, but I'm not going to give it away. I have no idea whether to tell if you're right or wrong. So, okay. Oh, just some random person turned on emote mode. That's even better. Okay, no takers. No one wants to solve this one. JSON or Jason object. Who said Jason? The wandering aviator. CSV. No, it's not CSV. Does anyone know what the JS in JSON stands for? Or want to guess? Great. It does stand for JavaScript, and that is not a dumb or silly question. JSON. The object system in JavaScript is called JSON. It's open source, industry standard, and you can find it tons of places outside of JavaScript. It's extremely important for data processing, standardizing file formats, search engines. If you can recognize a JSON file or recognize in a file that this is JSON, you will have a good skill. This will help you. This is like learning how to structure things in CSV or in XML. This is not something you would get a job just based on this, but this will help you dramatically over the years. And it's its own thing. Like, people use JSON independently of JavaScript all the time. And one pro tip, when you are working as a programmer or a designer or anything computer or tech related, if you ask your clients for a standard file format like JSON or CSV, it will make your life a lot easier. Don't let them give you some weird format. Ask for JSON. Okay, back to objects. And then we're going to jump into lab. So here we go. You've seen this picture before. We're using the colon as an operator. So on the left-hand side, we have the name of that object's properties or attributes. On the right-hand side, we have the value. Sometimes this kind of scheme is called a key value pair, but I don't want to call it that because that's more specific to lists than to JSON itself. Now here, this is where we access things using the dot operator. So we created our object compound, gave it color, offset, and height. Now I want to fill a shape with it. Okay, well, I'm going to treat it similarly to how I treated a variable and just use that instead of an actual color code. What's different is I have to use the object name compound followed by a period with no spaces, followed by the attribute name, which is color. And then I do the same thing to draw the actual rectangle. And what can anyone tell me what this shape will look like just based on the code? Put it in chat if you think you know. No takers. Yes, it is a rectangle, but it's a special kind of rectangle. Nothing. You can see compound again, but it won't give you the answer because the answer is on this slide. It's a square. Very good. It's a square because the height and the width are the same value. Like I said, you don't really need to know square if you know rectangle. Okay, that is our break until lab. If there's any questions in chat, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'm going to transition to the lab, and I hope to see all of you for the lab if you have the time. Okay, I just got a great question from Daniel. You do not need to remember any of this because it's in a slide. And because it's in a slide, you can download the slide and you can look it up at your leisure. The video is also on Twitch. I believe it's archived. Yeah, it's rewatchable immediately after it's done. So remember, these slides are for you. I doubt in 10 years you're going to really bust them open, but go back to them as much as you can. And why do we use clear again? That's a great question. That clear command deletes everything from the canvas. So if you have a loop and you start with clear, you start with a blank canvas. And then once the loop is done, it resets itself. So remember that problem with Samir and Fred. I can fix this issue. So if I clear everything out here, then before I draw, I've gotten rid of the canvas. So you need to use it like a little carefully, but just remember it's a great command that'll do a lot of things for you if you have a problem with loops going on too far or leaving too much stuff all over the screen. Jason or Jordan, you just said something to me. I did not catch the last part. Sorry for like I had Jason on the mind. Mm-hmm. This one. Uh, Should I cut to the break? Okay, I'm gonna cut to the break now. The clear function, I think that that might warrant some closer looking into, but I included there in case you are desperate for a fix for your program. And yep, yeah, it like the clear function is basically something you'll know when you need it. I needed it when I was making this arrow following program without the clear function. Like if I get rid of it, this is what happens. So, oh, that's what. Um, okay, we're gonna cut to break. And as far as clear goes, don't worry about it. It's just like a last resort kind of thing. If you have code or shapes that won't go away and they should be going away, or they're drawing too many times, like that's just a stopgap, like emergency measure. It just so you're familiar with it. And we're gonna meet back at 7:20 in Zoom, and that's a 10-minute break. It starts now. We're gonna work on the lab afterwards. I hope to see all of you there.